The essential communication that is expressed here is actually nonverbal. But because we podcast these and people expect to hear something, especially since they drove a long way to get here, we're forced to talk about something. Verbally. But there's a kind of communication that is referred to often. And in this kind of teaching environment, the direct path of teaching, which is called transmission. And you've probably heard that word, or you have a pretty strong sense of what it is, or you don't know what the heck it is, and you're wondering, what is he talking about? So I thought I'd say a little bit about that. Maybe, I don't know, give some hints about it. So the first thing is that the transmission is not verbal, even though it could include verbal. And when you hear the word transmission, you think, well, transmitter, which is sending some kind of signal out and implying there's a receiver. If there's a transmission, there's some kind of reception. I mean, that's our linear, simplistic way of thinking about it. So there's usually a sense of, there's a transmission from point A and it goes over to point B. Okay. And that's not really what transmission is, even though what's referred to as transmission could be experienced kind of like that, like you kind of get, what do they say, zapped by the guru. All of a sudden there's some kind of energy hit that you can feel, some power, shakti. And that is often referred to as a kind of transmission in this sense here. But what happens is that as an individual becomes more familiar with their deep openness, their spacious presence of being, awakened consciousness, then this this is tricky. I don't know how to follow that sentence. Sorry, I lost that one. I'll try it a different way. I've often used the example of a tuning fork. That there's a certain resonant field that your deep awareness has. And when you come into an environment like this, that tuning fork may be resonating, but it may be at a frequency that you actually normally wouldn't hear or feel. And so there's something about attunement that happens when one slows down the body, starts to notice sensations rather than being focused on thought, sensing the breath and so forth, becoming more aware on an energetic level, a chi level, a prana level, that sort of tuning of one's own inner tuning fork becomes vibrated. So even though it seems like that resonance is coming from outside of you, and you feel it, it's actually that which you are being awakened by that which everything is. It's kind of hard to talk about this. So I often say that when you really are tuned into the transmission, when your personal self is dissolved and there's just this field of energy, it isn't even going one way to the other or back. It's actually going in every direction simultaneously. Even though in our linear mind, even on another linear level, it can only go one way if it's going the other way. So when the so-called student wakes up, he feels the connection with the teacher, and that's called transmission. But as soon as he wakes up, they mutually recognize each other as that. And so that's what the teaching really is. That's all the stories where a student is acknowledged, that's it, you have it. That's what that is all about. That you and you know that. It's not an intellectual thing. There's a deep, profound, felt sense. It's almost another way to put it would be as if you were falling in love on the high level. On a level where there's no attachment and no need. Not a personal level. There's no person in it. But it's like a unified oneness. So I think that's a pretty good description. And often it feels like you're in love. I mean, I felt that with my teachers, certainly. There's this profound gratitude, this incredible love was there. And I think that's often, not always, but it's often a quality of that recognition of our unified field. And so I like the word. I mean, I think it's a beautiful kind of description. But I also like to point out that it's always mutual. It doesn't go one way. It can't. There's no such thing as it going one way. So it's when what did someone say? When your nose is clean, you can smell the flower. So when you are open, openness is there for you. When you recognize that which you are, it recognizes you too. So when you love your truth, when you love the truth, if you will, the truth loves you. It is a mutual love affair. And I think that's why people devote their whole lives to it, actually, particularly after they've had a powerful glimpse, awakening, where it's just like there's obviously nothing more important than that. It's just, everything else is transient, impermanent, empty, ultimately. As that quote that I read recently from Mayor Baba, I think, did I read it last week? Yeah. So, if you understand, when you're there, when you deeply get that, then when you come here, and we're hanging out, so to speak, in satsang, then it's really, if there's any work to be done, it's completely dropping any remnants of the personal self and letting them all be consumed in the fire of the transmission and turned into the light. That's why I call it alchemy and transmutation. So whatever you bring here, whatever's coming up in this cooking environment, the cooking of the transmission, you offer it, and you naturally offer it, whether it's emotion, whether it's physical stuff, whether it's, beliefs about how things are, or, conclusions that you realize were limited beliefs that weren't really true, whatever. Ideas about yourself that you thought you were a certain way, and you realize, well, that's not really true. Because you begin to move and more into this, and you say, and you naturally would say, I am this presence. We are this. Everything is this. There is no really we on that level. That's what non-dual means, that there are two. I mean, on a practical, ordinary reality level of things, obviously there's two. There's dualism. There's, relative reality. So transmission is in the realm of the absolute reality that we can't really understand, we can't really conceptualize. I mean, we do a very limited, piecemeal, poetic job of it at best, right? But you don't have to worry whether you actually understand the concepts at all, because if you have the courage and you're ready, which means you don't have a choice anymore, then you find out how to dive in and face what you haven't been able to face before, unwilling or unconscious of being able to face before. So, coming here is an opportunity to completely surrender. Not to some teacher or belief, but surrender to relief, surrender to freedom, surrender to the space that is not the realm of struggling, the realm of the pile of, conditioned, unsatisfactory circumstances. It literally does transcend it all. Even if you're dying, even if you're penniless, whatever the condition is. When you tune in, when you deeply unify consciousness with this field of presence, then you are, at least for a while, free of the conditional. I'm sure many of us, and I know many of us, would admit that if we hadn't found this, we wouldn't have made it this far. Because it was too effing hard. Or too disappointing or unfulfilling or whatever. So, it truly is, and it's a beautiful description, the saving grace. And so I remember asking, when it was very clear to me what this was, when this became incredibly clear to me with my first main teacher, Jean Klein, and we had many talks together, and we spent all kinds of time together, and I asked him once, because people had all kinds of ideas about transmission, which was really a lot of ideas about it. And the question was something like, if the student was open and available, could it, and I don't remember how I phrased it, it was something like, could it not be given? In other words, and the answer is, well, of course, it can't not be given. It's always here. It actually isn't transmitted. So transmission is actually not really accurate. It's always here. And when you're open, you are filled up with it. And at that moment, it can feel like you're receiving something. But actually, you've always been that. So that's the real, full kind of truth of it. And that's why they say that you are already what you are looking for, And even though on a intellectual level that's not too satisfying if you're suffering. Right? Like, well, gee, what do you mean? This isn't what I want. I want to be happy. I want to be free of this. So, but when you, more and more, and I know all of you have at least tasted this, maybe just a little bit or glimpsed it, but you wouldn't be here if that wasn't operating, because it brings you into this kind of an environment. Because this kind of environment can be really agitating, actually. Even though it's pretty low-key and neutral, you know. We're not doing prostrations on the floor, hours and hours of chanting and austerities. It's on the surface pretty like, just show up on 9th Street and sit around for a couple of hours. Seems pretty low-key, but it's like a microwave that you didn't know was on, and you're in it. And people, and you wouldn't believe what I hear, and see over the years. It's incredible. And it can be really provoking of a healing process. And so someone can come here and they just really felt good. I felt great when I got here, but then, man, I just wanted to run out the door. Why? Because something is working. There's some energy working. And our condition is to be comfortable and feel good and resist discomfort. So we don't know how to trust the transmission sometimes, until we do. And or often when people work with me privately and they leave and they say, wow, I just cooked for days and then a major shift happened. And I hear that all the time. Or on retreat, same thing, that someone on a retreat doesn't necessarily feel great at the end. They might feel fabulous. They might have a major transformation. That happens too. But they could also be in a process. They could activate that here. So it's almost like a booster shot. So there is a kind of reality to the transmission in that sense as well, that it's almost as if you're getting amplified in the space of presence. And when I was with my various teachers, that's how I used being with them, was to completely surrender into that presence. Sometimes I could hear what they were saying somewhere, but that wasn't where my attention was. It was 100% aligned in that energetic field. I'm not saying that that's where you're at or should be. I'm just saying that that's another way to be here, if that's where you're at. So it could be at any particular stage along the way. But it's helpful to know that. I think it's helpful to point that out. Kind of fill it in a little bit. I remember something that was funny. I remember when a number of us kind of older students would be at Jean's, he didn't call them satsangs, he called them dialogues. And afterwards we would do a sort of an assessment, like on a scale of 1 to 10, what was the transmission that night? I think it was a 3. I was definitely an 8. And then and then I remember being with Robert in Sedona, Robert Adams, and just different people. And I began to realize, wait a minute, this whole measurement thing is completely a misunderstanding of what's happening. And that the variables are so infinite that when you have, I think because so many of us wanted to have a certain experience in the room, a certain high, a certain intensity, whatever, that we related to that meant something. And so we often measured the experience based on that. But I began to realize that that's actually a completely not accurate measurement, because as one goes through openings and expansions, how can I say? You integrate that, and so going back into that same field won't have the same impact anymore. I don't know if that makes sense, what I'm saying. You don't even realize that in a sense, you are living in a bigger space, as a bigger space. So people often try to go back and repeat an experience and wonder why they're not having the same sort of blowout again, some big shakti blowout, and they're looking for that. And they're missing the point entirely, interestingly enough, and don't even realize that's already happened. There really is no teaching, really. It is I don't know what to call it, really. I like the word intimacy because it's a profound intimacy of what? Giving of ourselves 100% and receiving 100% simultaneously. So I think I often describe it that way, where it is a giving and receiving 100% in both directions. And then you truly understand what this teaching means and why we come together like this and why we get the support that we have here. And so I hope that was helpful. Okay. Sometimes people ask me questions, and would you please explain what are you talking about? And so if you have questions like that, and you may not feel like you want to ask them here, that's fine. But you could send us an email or write a note down, and we could collect them. And it helps. So if you have anything like that you say, well, would you explain what you mean by this, or feel free to give those to us, and we'll have a little pile over here. Well, it was good for me. Was it good for you? I remember when I was sitting with just Robert Adams in his living room, and we were sitting together for, I don't know, an hour or something. I didn't have any questions. We were just grooving in this lovely presence. And I remember I just said, oh, I'm so grateful to be in your presence. And he put his hands up, he goes, it's my pleasure. And I realized, wow, it's mutual. It's a mutual connection here. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for being. And thank you for your openness and your spaciousness and your, beautiful sensitivity. It's really amazing to share the space with so many of you who are really deeply tuning in, and I feel deeply enriched by our being together. So I'm really glad to see you and be with you, and I hope to see you soon. And in the meantime, have fun. And keep discovering. Okay, I'll see you next time.